welcome back. I'm Joanna Kleinman, and I want to talk to you today about an invisible force that's driving your life. So, if you've spent any time in the worlds of personal growth or entrepreneurship or leadership or high performance, you've probably heard some version of this message that people who succeed are the ones who learn how to do uncomfortable things. Now, I do agree with that, but there's a but. And I'm going to get to the but in a little while. So I agree that the life that you want does require discomfort. The business you want, the career you want, the impact you want, the confidence you want, the version of yourself you want to become, all of that requires that you do things that feel uncomfortable. So you'll have to risk failure, and you'll have to experience rejection, and you'll have to tolerate disappointment, and you'll have to walk into situations where there are no guarantees. And in fact, I've been doing that exact thing for the last 30 years. Pushing through discomfort, taking action when I was afraid, saying yes before I felt ready, and continuing to keep moving when things feel uncertain. And I've built two businesses, one in psychotherapy, one in personal transformation. Now I'm building my third business in the professional transformation arena. And so I put myself in a lot of situations where I had no idea how things would turn out, right? And to take an action when I'm afraid. But for a long time, I believed that that was the answer. I thought if I could just push through the discomfort, I'd eventually arrive at a place where I felt the confidence and the success and the security and the value that I was longing for. So now that I'm on my third iteration of my business, what I realize is that looking back on all of those goals, I reached a lot of goals that I thought would change the way that I felt. And after every goal that I achieved, after all of the excitement wore off, there it was again, that same self-doubt, that same anxiety, that same feeling that something was still missing, that same sense that I wasn't quite where I was supposed to be. Now, that is what led me to create the Mind Method. Because what I recognized a long time ago is that pushing through discomfort is not enough. Because the discomfort is not the real problem. The discomfort is pointing to something deeper, and that is the invisible force underneath the discomfort. So that invisible force is a belief. It's some meaning that you've attached to the outcome that you're desiring. So when I started paying attention to this a long time ago, I discovered something very interesting. So I was not afraid of things not working out. I was actually afraid of what I believed it would mean about me if something didn't work out. Now, I've been practicing the Mind Method for a long time. And what that has led within me is to see that the discomfort that I have felt throughout my life was never coming from the circumstances. It was always coming from the story that was attached to that circumstance. Now, for most of my life, I couldn't see that story. And it's not because it wasn't there. It was because it was so deeply woven into the fabric of the way that I experienced everything in my life, the way I experienced myself, the way I experienced other people, and the way I experienced the world. And that felt like the truth. I didn't even know there was a story. I didn't know that there were beliefs underneath that discomfort. I didn't know that there was meaning that was attached to the outcomes that I desired. So sometimes we believe, oh, I'm afraid to fail, or I'm afraid to be rejected. But what we can really discover underneath that is it's not the failure or the rejection that you're afraid of. It's what it would mean about you. So when you do that deeper discovery, you discover a blind spot. And this is a really important distinction because there are profound blind spots for most people. And those blind spots are the stories that have been created so early in life that we don't experience them as stories. We actually experience those deep hidden beliefs as reality. So many people don't hear a voice saying in their mind, if this doesn't work out, it means I'm not enough. They just feel anxiety, or they feel pressure, or they feel urgency. So the story operates beneath our awareness. So the emotional experience sits right on the surface, but the story is often hidden. So we spend our lives trying to manage the emotion without ever questioning the deeper hidden belief that's creating the emotion. Now, this is exactly why people stay stuck in the same patterns in their life over and over and over, no matter how many circumstances change, because you can't change a pattern that you can't even see, that you don't even know is there. So the mind method gives you a way to see what has been invisible, not just the discomfort itself, but the meaning underneath the discomfort. And that meaning is attached to an identity. Now, that's the identity that I call your inner critic. It is the automatic, conditioned identity that you don't even know has been driving you for much of your life. And that's a completely different perspective. Because if you're afraid to start your business or change your career or get out of a relationship or get into a relationship, it's not the thing that's scaring you. There's some belief underneath it. So maybe the belief for you is that if you fail, it means you're not capable. Or if you leave a relationship, it might be a fear that somehow you won't be lovable enough to be in a more fulfilling relationship. If you're afraid to speak up and be visible, it may not be speaking up and being visible that's the problem. It may be a fear that if somebody criticizes you or rejects you when you speak up, that's going to mean you're not worthy. So circumstances change, but the meaning that we assign to circumstances often doesn't when we don't even know the meaning that we're assigning. Now, this is what most people don't understand. So they spend years, decades trying to change their circumstances because they believe their circumstances are creating their feelings. So they chase the next thing. Now, that could be the next achievement or the next goal. It could be the next relationship or accomplishment or the next level of success. And they believe that getting there will make them feel different. But then they get there. and the feeling remains, and that makes the feeling even more enhanced. Because eventually you get to a place where you've achieved and accomplished everything that you thought would take care of that feeling. So what happens is that the circumstance continues to activate something that's been there all along. So that's the conditioned identity. That's the part of us that learned very early on in life that our worth was attached to performance and approval and achievement and success or appearance or productivity or being who other people needed us to be. So our inner critic identity learns to ask one question over and over and over again. And that question is, what do I need to do in order to be enough? And then it spends a lifetime trying to answer it. Now, that's why so many people are living lives that look super successful on paper, but they are not fulfilled. In fact, many people in this category are more unfulfilled than ever. Because once they reach the goal, they recognize perhaps they've been pursuing goals that were never truly their deepest goals. So that what's being reflected back to them is that they're living according to values that they never consciously chose, that these are values that maybe were inherited from family or from our culture or from social media or from school or from whatever environment they grew up in. We all grew up with definitions of success that we absorbed long before we were old enough to even question them. So you could have one person that feels most alive when they're taking risks and they're building businesses and they're chasing possibility. You could have another person that feels most alive when they're creating peace and they're creating stability and they're creating deep connection. And neither of those are right or wrong. But when you're disconnected from yourself, that's when you don't ask what really matters to you. You instead are continually asking, what am I supposed to want? That's where people lose themselves. Because you can check every box, you can accomplish every goal, you can still feel empty. So your fulfillment is only going to come when you're living in alignment with what is authentically true for you now. Now, there's another layer to this, because even when you're living from your authentic self instead of your inner critic, the discomfort doesn't disappear. In fact, sometimes the discomfort increases because now you're no longer following that familiar conditioning. You're following your deeper truth. And following that deeper truth requires courage because you're facing a lot of uncertainty. You're facing a lot of people that might misunderstand you and might even question what you're doing. And you may even have to disappoint some people. So when you are living in that deeper truth, what is required is that you walk away from identities that you may have spent years building. Because living in that level of truth requires becoming someone you've never been before. Now, that is really what changed everything for me. And that is what I support having other people become, someone they've never been before. Because in order for you to access the feeling that you want to have now, you can't continue to live inside of the same patterns of thoughts and those hidden beliefs and those emotional patterns that are connected to those hidden beliefs and the behaviors that are connected to wanting to feel how your inner critic says you need to feel. So most people are living backwards because they do believe that the success creates the confidence, or the achievement creates the fulfillment, or the relationship creates the experience of love. Now, if that were true, every successful person would feel fulfilled, and many successful people don't. So we know that's not true. So we can say the feeling has never come from the circumstance. But what we also have to understand is that your circumstances amplify what's already there. So what changed for me was the recognition that the work wasn't learning how to achieve more. The work was learning how to access the energy that I thought achievement was going to give me now. Not someday, right? Not that that next level would give me that energy. I needed to understand what was getting in my way of accessing that energy right now. Because if what you're truly seeking is joy or fulfillment or connection, then the work is learning how to cultivate that now. So these energy states of peace and aliveness and fulfillment and love and connection and abundance, these are the energy states that actually create the circumstances that you're seeking. These energy states are the fuel that actually creates the journey towards what you're accomplishing. This is the energy from which your life is built. Now, this is what I help entrepreneurs understand now. The life that you're trying to create is not built from proving and striving. It isn't built from your inner critic's endless pursuit of trying to find your sense of wholeness or enoughness. So the most fulfilling things that you will ever create in your life are going to emerge from a completely different place. So when you're operating in these states now, you start taking very different action. You're no longer taking action in order to prove your value or in order to prove your worthiness. You're taking action as an expression of how you currently experience yourself now. Now, those are two very different energies. So the energy of striving and proving is an energy of contraction. And the energy of an expression of who you already are now is an energy of expansion. So there's the energy of chasing and there's the energy of creating. So the energy of chasing is trying to fill a hole. The energy of creating is already overflowing from wholeness. So I haven't just discovered this for myself. I've discovered this over and over and over again, and particularly in the coaches that I train now. The energy comes first. The circumstances follow the energy, not the other way around. So you have a very conditioned self that believes when I get there, then I'll feel like enough. So stepping into a different identity, that identity is built on accessing who you want to be right now. And then from that place, creating what's next. That distinction alone changes everything. Because the moment that you stop waiting for life to give you permission to feel the way that you want to feel, you reclaim your power. Now, I want to be clear about something. This is not easy. Okay. It might be one of the hardest things that you'll ever do is to repeatedly unhook yourself from an identity that's been square in your blind spot. So your old identity has spent years, sometimes decades, convincing you that the feeling comes after the thing. And so therefore your entire nervous system has been conditioned to believe that something outside of you is responsible for how you feel inside, how you experience everything. That's your old identity talking. That's your conditioned self that's been trained to postpone your peace, your fulfillment, your aliveness. Your authentic self understands something very different. So your authentic self understands that while circumstances might influence your experience, they don't create your identity. So let's talk about how you begin accessing those feelings of wholeness and fulfillment and aliveness right now. Well, the first step is you've got to stop continually looking for what do I need to get in order to feel this way. You have to start asking, what would the version of me who already feels this now believe? What would that version of me, believe about life, believe about money, believe about success, believe about other people? How would that version of me think? How would they show up in the world? What would they focus on? What would they appreciate? What would they trust? And you have to practice this over and over and over again, shifting out of your inner critic's lens and into the lens of your authentic self. Because it's from that version of you that your most meaningful life is going to be created. Now, this is where your nervous system becomes really important, because most people believe that when they feel that intense discomfort, that fear, that anxiety, that feeling of wanting to know how it's all going to unfold, when they feel that intense discomfort, many people call that a dysregulated nervous system. So they assume they need to regulate their nervous system. They need to get rid of the feeling. They need to go do some yoga or some breath work or some meditation, right? Or some journaling to get rid of the feeling. And don't get me wrong, I am all for yoga and journaling and meditation and breath work. I am all for that. But not to get rid of the feeling of discomfort. Because if you believe that the discomfort in your nervous system is wrong, and you want to get rid of that feeling and return to that baseline calm, it's going to be almost impossible to expand. Because what you're calling dysregulation, that's not a breakdown. What's happening in your nervous system is you're being asked to handle more uncertainty, more visibility, more responsibility, more truth, more unknown, more discomfort than maybe you've ever handled before. So what you might be calling a dysregulated nervous system might actually mean that you've just simply reached the ceiling of your current capacity of your old identity. The version of you that's capable of creating the life that you truly want has a very different nervous system than the version of you that's been running the show for a long time. So the version that you're stepping into doesn't require a calmer nervous system. It requires a larger nervous system, a nervous system with a greater capacity to sit with uncertainty and tolerate discomfort and move forward without guarantees. So maybe what you are saying is discomfort. Maybe that's just an invitation. And the goal is not to get rid of the discomfort. The goal is to expand the capacity of your nervous system, to begin understanding the invisible force that's underneath that discomfort, so you can stop living from that old story and start creating very different stories that are from your authentic self. Because this is where true transformation begins. If you've listened to this episode and you found yourself thinking, I want to learn how to do this work, not just for myself. I want to learn how to do this work and show other people how to live this way. I want to personally invite you to explore the Mind Method certification program. It is an ICF accredited program. It is 6 months, and you will learn so much more than just a coaching methodology. You're going to learn how to recognize the invisible patterns that keep people stuck. You're going to learn how to help other people, not just you, but other people uncover their stories and their fears and their conditioned beliefs that are driving their behavior and keeping them stuck in the same loop. You're going to learn how to guide people out of their inner critic selves and into their authentic self. And perhaps the most important thing is you're going to experience this transformation so profoundly inside yourself first, because the most powerful coaches are not the ones who just understand a framework intellectually. The most powerful coaches are the ones who've embodied it themselves, the ones who've done the work of expanding their own awareness and increasing their own capacity and transforming the relationship that they have with themselves and their lives. So if you've ever felt called to help people create true lasting change, if you've ever wondered whether coaching could be a part of your future, or if you are just looking for a meaningful way to create impact while building a coaching practice that's grounded in deep transformational work, the Mind Method certification program might be exactly what you've been searching for. So the next cohort is beginning on June 15th. So if this is speaking to you, I'd love to have a conversation with you and see whether it's a right fit for you. You can learn more through the link in the show notes, or you can reach out to me directly at joanna@masteringyourmind.com. Or you can go to masteringyourmind.com and schedule some time on my calendar to connect with me. So as always, thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in. And until the next episode, please remember, you are not your inner critic identity, and your greatest freedom begins the moment that you stop believing that you are. Thanks for tuning in today.